Did he have anything that could deal with this? He did. There, that should soften them up well enough. It made it so that they died in one hit, thanks to his staff's enchantments. That was well enough. The largest of them was the only one left. Well, so much for having supposedly keen eyes. Well, it was fine, he supposed. They hadn't been able to actually harm him too much. Another open chamber. A shadow flower of some sort. Interesting. This dark purple flower, born from the shadows, radiates a small purple aura. When consumed, it grants the subject better senses in the dark. He'd read on this. The herb was quite rare. He had to wonder if he could make it into a series of potions instead of just relying on its raw state. He'd be returning to his lair eventually anyway. Another door. Demons of some sort. Well, he really didn't want to go into that spell just yet. Thankfully, they were using spells that had little effect on him at the moment. Their claws weren't sharp enough to break his enchantments. Only that initial spell was something to be worried of. Horde wilting was not a spell to be underestimated. Ugh. Well then. He'd seen demons and he panicked, but thankfully it appeared they had only been minor demons. Those slads he'd first encountered while in Undrentide's ruins were more of a challenge. It was odd that he was able to say that now. Calling simple slads. Or calling slads simple, as it were. Another broken down door. He truly had to thank his enchanted necklace at this point. Stones of shadow and actual shadows. Enchanted arrows of some sort. They appeared to be from the Huron tribe. Unfortunately, he used a crossbow, not a bow. But perhaps he could learn the enchantment placed on them, create his own series of bolts that had similar power. Well, not that he had much of a choice now, but it was time to move on, it seemed. One final door. Now that he knew he could just break them down manually, he was cursing himself for using his bolts of lightning on them before. He'd been too wary. Hopefully it wouldn't cost him now. More shadow. Another Shadowvar hunter? A shadow spider? He knew it couldn't be harmless, that much was certain. Though there was no initial threat showing its face. No, just inky darkness. He'd still keep his wits about him. Just because it wasn't a threat now didn't mean it couldn't become one very easily. That door appeared to lead toward the center chamber, judging by the layout of these caverns. So what was in here? Nothing. Ah. Some unfortunate soul that lost his armor and helmet and such. A backpack, though. A belt of defense. It seems to increase one's durability. Golden dust. A very potent blend of medical herbs. Those could be turned and diluted into a very potent potion of healing. Gold dust. The belt as well was very nice. Potions and the gold dust could be used for all manner of alchemical ingredients. It was very difficult to acquire. And that was not because gold was difficult to acquire, though there were the legal ramifications of turning golden coins into golden dust, he supposed. But the main issue was the required time and perfection. More webs. The gold couldn't just be ground up. That would give you a form of golden dust, but what was used in alchemy was a very refined variant that was almost like a powder. It wasn't just sand in its state. Instead, it was a perfect, almost cloud-like substance if you blew it. And it could be used for all sorts of potions due to this. It would dilute itself and become nearly unnoticeable, untraceable within things that you could drink, making it very useful as a chemical basis for many enchantments and potions. And of course, it could be used in actual crafting as well. A dried and desecrated corpse surrounded by cocoons and webbing. Well, it seemed as though Victor was about to come face to face with whatever queen lived in these catacombs. Or not. What was this? Chitinous death or some sort of strange apparitional vermin. They are vile and ugly and extremely dangerous, though luckily also very rare. They use their legs to drum on the ground, causing caves to collapse sometimes. Some mixture of the ant-humanoids and the spiders. It almost reminded him of a drider, but instead of being half drow, it was purely chitinous, purely an insect humanoid. It had in fact been shaking the cavern, but luckily it didn't appear to be of any threat. And that belt was quite the potent thing as well. If he could break down these enchantments and combine them, he'd have an even more potent arsenal. Well, if nothing else, he was acquiring some very unique items. This left only that central door now, I suppose. He was still wary of that darkness. He didn't like the fact it was there. Now, what was in the central chamber? The traps were interesting as well. They were enchantment based, so that every time you actually made contact with the door, it released them. If you could learn how to do that, that'd be very valuable. Now, surely there was some guardian here. He couldn't just waltz his way down into the lower levels, could he? The tree ant had deposited him in these caves, assuming that the caves would kill him for it. He didn't see anything. And now he was just asking for trouble, sticking his nose about. Another shadow flower in a grass tuft of some sort. This grass was green. And was the corruption not complete then? Was some of this place still untainted by the shadow plane? Seemed unlikely, but clearly it was possible on some level. And quartz could be used as a basic focal crystal. Still nothing of note, Well, it seemed there was no Grand Guardian after all. Or perhaps it was just on the lower levels. Or perhaps it would just be the treant itself, or this poor nymph that had been drug here. Or dryad? He couldn't recall which exactly it had been. But that spoke very much of Faye. Multiple Shade Servants and the Corrupted Shadow Dryad. Alright, well, first things first. Need to get rid of these. She was able to heal them using normal magic. Was it because it was tainted? Either way, if she was using support magic, he needed to get rid of those that she could enhance. He hated to kill such a creature, but he had little choice. He also needed to know exactly where her tree was. Or was it mending her? It seemed to be. He hated to destroy its tree, but if he had no other choice, he would. Luckily, her offensive spells seemed to be quite limited. He needed to see where his stood up against it. She intended to just keep reforming from the tree's root. Then, if he had no other choice, damn her with these spells. The Shadow Aegon was all he could think. Because that was not a tree. That was a central base stone, which meant with the acorn destroyed, and just like that he saw the darkness starting to fade. Would that be enough? He wasn't certain. She certainly seemed substantially weaker now. And this time the poor thing remained dead. And gloves that he couldn't actually identify. He would have to take time later to figure it out. Did the rebirthing process regenerate her armor as well? That was very odd. Well, it had worked, whatever the case. He had hoped that perhaps he'd be able to still speak with her, even if she'd gone mad, but this place had gotten to her too far, it seemed. He'd been attacked on sight. It was regrettable. At least she no longer had to suffer, he supposed. Well, he was wary of doing this, but he didn't see another choice, really. Good. It was just the same trap. Nothing of serious note. It would be easy to shatter through these. Eventually. As he beat on the chest to force it open, however, he couldn't help but recall that poor dryad. He had to wonder if there had been another option. A black onyx statue. Not that that's what this was, but that's what he could make this into. Black onyx was a potent necromantic center. A powerful staff, though not one that he could use. Powerful set of armor as well. That would have to most assuredly go into one of his pouches of holding, though. Even with his enchanted strength, he couldn't go around lifting everything. Umbrals. Oil? Intriguing. The oil may be useful for other alchemical creations. A stone of prayer to Grumbar. Summons an earth elemental. Another potent set of herbs. Another shadow flower. If nothing else, he was getting many useful ingredients to make very potent potions out of all this. It seemed he didn't have much of a choice with this. Well, at least her suffering was over now. Now, he was hesitant to just grab onto any thin chain and pray it held, but Victor didn't exactly have many options to get out of here, so he would do whatever he had to. Luckily, it seemed it managed it. Ah, the woman from before. So she had died before he could get to her. How unfortunate. She had quite the potent arsenal here as well. There was no point in leaving it. Very potent. Shadow Corridor was engraved on the side of this large key. Interesting. And a set of notes that she was holding. Apparently her name was Rith. Getting into the city wasn't as difficult as I imagined, especially with the helpful scrolls provided by the Lich. Our assumptions are correct. There's a group of them collecting ancient Nithri soul scrolls and artifacts. Perhaps they know less about their supposed past than they let on. They are also much more divided than first realized, which could work to our advantage. Political strife in a city? Was there a city in the Plane of Shadows? The Lich she was referencing was clearly the Shadow Lich. Now, what was that? Oh, whom, rather? Almost looked like a dark gnome. The Merkling creature looked up at Victor, eyes wide with fear.
Who are you? You must help me.
I'm Victor von Rye, and you have nothing to fear now that I am here. Seems too much like the old Victor, unfortunately. He has learned that this realm is constantly trying to kill him, and so he would take the more middle ground response initially. Who are you, and what are you doing here?
I don't know. I was just walking home and this doesn't look like the forest near my home at all.
Victor would, of course, want to know if there was anything he could do to help.
Did you see Gracier?
Who is this Gracier?
Oh, that must be what is causing all this trouble. You all seem so brave. Maybe if you chop down Gracier the Twisted, I will be able to go home. Will you, please?
I'll see what I can do. Was that perhaps the treant? Judging by the name and the fact that she commented on having to chop it down, that seems, well, highly likely, actually. So a treant that had drug him down to the nymph. He needed to chop it down? Perhaps he could at least save that tree spirit using the shovel. If he chopped it down, or at least stunned it long enough to dig it up. Had the forest itself changed? There are far more trees here than when he'd first come through. But those were the same stones. Tentacles of some sort. Well, this wasn't exactly what he'd had in mind, but he'd do what he had to, he supposed. It was clear he had to ignore the little ones. He needed to cut down the primaries. Whatever these things were, extensions of the treant, perhaps? Well, now they were dead. Luckily, they didn't seem to be that dangerous, all things considered. There was the exit. Where was this treant? He'd assumed it'd be here. Another exit. Perhaps he'd have to explore. Had the nymph been suppressing it? And now with nothing left to hold it back, it was just expanding its power? That wasn't a favorable outcome. That implied that the treant was completely corrupt. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see future content, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification icon. If you'd like access to bonus content, such as special privileges on my personal Discord, extra information on my stories and world building, or perhaps simply wish to support my work here, please consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you for all your time, and I can't wait to see you in the next chapter of our story.